What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you today with our weekly rankings, our week 2 rankings. Basically, what we do on Saturdays now going forward for our weekly schedule is that we are going to be comparing our own rankings versus ECR on FantasyPros expert consensus rankings, seeing who we're higher on relative to the other experts in the industry, who we're lower on relative to the other experts in the industry. And if you guys want access to our weekly rankings before we get into this, we're going to be making reference to them a lot. Our weekly rankings can be obtained one of 3 ways. You can go to our website, thefantasystockexchange.com, buy them for $20. Number 2, you can deposit on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Or 3, you can become a Patreon, either $10 or $40 a month for those 2 tiers, and you'll get our weekly rankings one of those 3 ways. So that's all the housekeeping we have today. Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, ready to wrap up this week of content going into Sunday football. Again, you would have had already your week 1 matchups. Let's make sure you're ready and poised to set your week 2 lineups and end up taking that dub. So I'm ready to go. I'm fired up. Great week of football coming. But before we get into these rankings, as always, we're going to hit the intro. All right, so we're going to start off with the quarterback position. And Corey, this is something we both agree on, but who's your first duo of quarterbacks that you're much higher on than consensus this week?
Yeah, and it's the game of the week, basically, from a fantasy perspective. Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert. I have 5 spots higher than consensus on both guys. Both guys are my top 5 quarterbacks for the week. I'm a little surprised that the industry as a whole hasn't just known that this is going to be a shootout game. It's the highest over-under on the slate at 55 points currently. It sounds like some of the action's on the under, so I'm not really sure what that means. You know, the sharps are kind of betting the under because the public's probably just freaking out about all the points. But either way, both of these defenses are, beatable through the air. Both of these quarterbacks have a lot of options to throw to. I don't expect this game to be a low-scoring game. I expect both quarterbacks to be able to get it done through the air and both running backs to get it done through the air, to be honest, as well. I don't think Zeke's going to run wild for 200 rushing yards in this game. I think if he gets it done, it's going to be on the back of scoring opportunities and receiving volume. And obviously, Austin Eckler, we know, can contribute in that area of the game as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm looking at this game, I currently have Dak Prescott 5 spots higher and Justin Herbert 3 spots higher. And man, this could genuinely be a 45-41 type of game. This is a similar game script to what we saw last week when both our quarterbacks ended up putting up huge games on Thursday Night Football. There's going to be points scored. Make sure you get some action in this game, especially on DFS. You mentioned some sharps are avoiding this game, quote unquote.
Not DFS sharps, but betting sharps are taking the under in this game.
I was about to say, because if that's the case, this seems to me on the surface the chalkiest game of the week. So
it is from a DFS perspective. The ownership projections bear that out. Cooper, Keenan Allen, and CeeDee Lamb are all in the top 5 highest owned receivers, and both of these quarterbacks are in the top 5 as well.
Which makes perfect sense because, again, this is going to be a shootout of the ages. That 405 slate is absolutely stacked. I mentioned the quarterback rankings show. So if you have one of these quarterbacks, expect some huge numbers this week. I'm talking 30 plus, 35 plus points.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of that 4 p.m. slate, like you said, there's a lot of good quarterbacks to be used in that slate. I currently have Ryan Tannehill 2 spots higher than consensus. I believe Ryan Tannehill is a guy that is going to be in for a bit of a bounce back this week. Obviously, I had high expectations for him last week going up against the Cardinals defense. I thought the Titans offense would really put up some points in that game. They stifled Derrick Henry on the ground, and they were able to get after Ryan Tannehill, the Cardinals pass rush. The Seahawks pass rush, not as quite as good as this, oh my God, let me restart that. And the Cardinals pass rush was able to get after Ryan Tannehill in the passing game quite a bit. Hopefully, they can bounce back with the Seahawks pass rush not being quite as good as the Arizona Cardinals with Chandler Jones and J.J. Watt and those guys. So I think Ryan Tannehill is going to be in for a big bounce back in this game. The Seahawks run defense is pretty stingy, so it could be a game that if they want to win, it's got to be up to Ryan Tannehill. It's got to be up to A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, because I don't think Derrick Henry is going to be super, super efficient on the ground. Although he is Derrick Henry, it's not like you're going to be sitting him.
Yeah, no, I fully agree here. I also have Ryan Tannehill in a couple spots ahead of consensus. And listen, I expect this to be another super, super high scoring affair. We're talking the likes of DK Metcalf, Julio Jones, Tyler Lockett, and AJ Brown all sharing the field at the same time with the wide receiver cores. And I just expect this to be a lot of points. I know for a fact that the Titans defense struggled heavily last week. Guess what? You're playing another very good mobile, out of structure quarterback with Russell Wilson, arguably a better real life player. I think actually inarguably a better real life player than Kyler Murray. So Both defenses are going to have their hands full. I expect this to be a 30-plus point scored type of affair on each side. And if that's the case, I mean, Ryan Tannehill, I'm going to trust what I saw in 2019, 2020. One bad game in week one's not going to completely shift my narrative on the fact that I think Ryan Tannehill's a very good, very efficient real-life quarterback. So as a result, I'm going to adjust him accordingly.
Right. And another thing that I think is going to play into this week two's matchups is that the Titans, the Packers, some of these teams that didn't play anybody in the preseason got out to a bit of a slower starts. The Titans didn't play anybody in the preseason, like Tannehill, Henry, AJ Brown. None of those guys played in the preseason. It's just taking them a bit of time to get the rust off. And I think that's going to end in this game. So moving from some of the guys that were higher on at the quarterback position to some of the guys that were lower on. And if at this point in the video, if you guys enjoyed, like the video, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, I have them 5 spots lower and 4 spots lower relative to consensus rankings right now. The reason I have these guys lower is because of all these great options this week, because Dak and Herbert I view as a higher tier this week, because Aaron Rodgers is playing the Detroit Lions, because Tom Brady's playing the Atlanta Falcons. I just think Josh Allen in his matchup is going to be faced with a tougher task going up against the Dolphins secondary, where Diggs is probably going to see shadow coverage from either Jones or Xavier Howard. It's going to be a little bit more difficult for them to be moving the ball on offense than it is for some of these other quarterbacks. And for Lamar Jackson, we know he's not exactly the greatest when he has to play from behind, which is probably what's going to happen in this game against Kansas City. Either way, you're still going to be starting these guys if you have them, because there's a good chance you don't have any of the other quarterbacks I mentioned behind them to back them up. But they're still top 10 quarterbacks for me. I just would prefer from a DFS perspective, or if you have a better option, to play some of those Bradys and Rodgers this week.
Yeah, and for sure on Josh Allen's front, I do match him up. Again, I think it's going to be quote unquote bounce back game for him, but having him higher than 8 is just a tough thing to really stomach, because again, you're looking at a range. Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, Russell Wilson. Like, I would prefer those other quarterbacks I just mentioned over Josh Allen this week. But however, I am aligned with consensus on Lamar, specifically because, as I mentioned, the quarterback show, this is the tied for the highest over-under on the entire slate. Although necessarily it may not be the most favorable script from a real-life perspective for Lamar Jackson, I just think that points are going to be flying in this game. Patrick Mahomes is going to be putting pressure on the other end. And as a result, I think this could be a Lamar Jackson 120 rushing yards, a touchdown type of game. And again, top 9 quarterbacks this week are so close, but I'll just trust on the fact that I think Lamar Jackson's going to be able to do with his legs.
For sure. And yeah, and by no means was I going to be sitting Lamar Jackson or anything like that. Yeah. A lot of these quarterbacks, like 12 through like 20, are kind of interchangeable. The Baker Mayfields, the Tuas, the Sam Darnolds, Teddy Bridgewater even has a good matchup this week. So we're not going to really cover those guys. But one guy that we both think is a little too high in consensus is Ben Roethlisberger.
Why?
I have him 4 spots higher or lower than consensus. You have him 7 spots lower than consensus. And I understand he has a good matchup, on paper against the Raiders, but the Raiders pass rush looked pretty good against the Ravens offensive line. The Steelers offensive line is a lot worse than the Ravens offensive line. So I think Roethlisberger is going a little bit too high. I understand he has good passing weapons to throw to, but I can't get behind, starting him over guys like Tua or even Matt Ryan or someone like that this week.
Yeah, it makes no sense. We saw what Yannick Ngakoue and Max Crosby were able to do last week. Now we got them going up against Chuma Okorafor. I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly. Anybody leave that in the comment section. And Joe Haeg as the bookend tackles for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I just think this is going to be an absolute massacre on both sides of the football. Obviously, you got Pittsburgh Steelers making life miserable for Derek Carr on the Raiders end for the Raiders offense. I just don't see much success happening for Ben Roethlisberger in terms of having time to develop plays down the field. Yeah, I just view this as more of a game script for Najee Harris in the sense that they want to get him going early. They want to get him in the short passing game to develop because, again, Ben Roethlisberger is not going to have much time in that pocket, and he is not even close to the athlete that Lamar is in terms of making plays out of structure. So I just see a low ceiling option in this game.
Yep, for sure. So moving off of quarterbacks, we can go into running backs where we do have a little bit more discrepancies in this, running back 1 to 30 range. DeAndre Swift is a guy that we were both really high on coming into the season. We're both higher on him now comparatively to ECR because, I talked about it already, but DeAndre Swift, people are saying like this is going to be a bad game script for him against the Packers. Like this is exactly what we wanted to DeAndre Swift. He is the long down and distance running back. I talked about that on the running back starts and sits video. He is the 2-minute drill running back. If they're playing a hurry up offense because they're getting pelted by the Packers, which is what I expect to happen in this game, because on the other side of the ball, no one's going to defend Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, and Robert Tonyan coming off of a horrible loss. They're going to be pissed off. They're going to put up points against this Lions defense. So I think this could be another 10 plus target game for DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, can we talk about the fact that people who are saying this is a bad game script for DeAndre Swift clearly didn't see that the fact he was the RB4 in half PPR last week on 11 carries? Like, this guy doesn't need carries to be able to be an elite fantasy football option. He's currently made running back 8 on the week, and I expect this to be another double-digit target type of game for DeAndre Swift. Listen, DeAndre Swift may very well be a top 7 to 10 running back for the rest of the season if he's going to continue having that Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler like target share in this offense. And judging from that receiver core, I don't see anything changing anytime soon. So I absolutely love DeAndre Swift, starting with top 10 confidence, in my opinion.
Yeah, and two guys, speaking of pass catching running backs that we are higher on than consensus. I'm higher on one of them, more so in line with consensus on the other, but I have Nyheim Hines 6 spots higher than consensus, as do you. I have James White 1 spot higher than consensus, 6 spots higher. You have him. So both of those pass catching running backs you're higher on. Again, we were doing this through like a half PPR lens. In PPR leagues, they'd be even probably a little bit higher for us. The reason I like Nyheim Hines this week, and I did write about him in my DFS article for Draft Sharks, is because Nyheim Hines on DraftKings specifically, which is a full PPR format, he's presented with a great game script because the Rams as a defense were top 5 in rushing yards allowed for opposing running backs, which is obviously bad news for Jonathan Taylor, but they were top 10 in targets allowed for running backs. So Nyheim Hines is the type of running back, obviously, that's going to get a lot of targets. We saw him get 8 targets last week. I don't expect, with the state of the Colts receiving core, that they're going to run their offense any other way except through these two running backs, through Jonathan Taylor and through Nyheim Hines. They commanded a 45% target share combined last week, and I think that's going to keep up for the most part all season.
Yeah, and I quickly wanted to lay mention the fact that people are quote unquote surprised on the short game usage of this Colts offense with Carson Wentz. Clearly didn't watch Carson Wentz in Philly, because we saw for years those tight ends, those running backs were getting peppered with targets. I see this being the future for the rest of the season. I mean, Nyheim Hines is arguably the best wide receiver. Yes, receiver overall on the Colts roster. People want to say Zach Pascal's their wide receiver. No, it's Nyheim Hines. And the fact is, Nyheim Hines and Jonathan Taylor should both be seeing significant targets in this game. We've been preaching Nyheim Hines all offseason, and in my opinion, until further notice, he's at minimum in half PPR, a top 30 type of back. And a similar view to what I think of James White. Again, this is a guy I'm penciling in for 8 to 10 targets this week going up against those New York Jets. We saw Mac Jones look his way early and often last week. I think he builds off that. And this is the type of offense that the Patriots want to run. They want to get the ball out short. They want to get the ball out quick. And Mac Jones is the perfect quote unquote point guard to be able to supplement James White production. So I love both these pass catching running backs. And again, if you started with a hero RB type of build, these are the type of guys you want going into those double digit rounds. Obviously the drafts are over, but if you were listening to us, you probably would have had a good amount of shares of them.
Yeah, and like that's the difference between Hines and White, though. As you mentioned, there's no tight end on the Colts roster that's going to take away those short targets. There's 2 of them on the Patriots roster, and they also have Damian Harris, who has a better matchup in this game on the ground against the Jets defense as compared to Jonathan Taylor against the Rams front. So that's kind of the difference between those two pass catching guys. Obviously, we have a difference between Ezekiel Elliott, as we probably always will all season, because you view Ezekiel Elliott a lot higher than I do, but I personally have him at consensus RB11. You have him 6 spots higher. I guess that would make you having him in the top
RB5. Yeah.
Yeah, RB5.
Yeah.
To me, I just prefer, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, Derrick Henry, some of those other guys that are going to get big workloads ahead of him. Also, obviously, Antonio Gibson, we already saw play yesterday. I had Antonio Gibson ahead of him as well. Didn't necessarily have the greatest game. So Zeke Elliott is a guy that I'm willing to buy low. I think he's a guy that is going to be a great workload player, and we know he can hold up to a workload, but I personally, in this game, I think it's going to be done through the passing game, as going to be the case probably for a lot of the games with Dallas. So he has great scoring opportunities in this game. He's going to get a couple targets as well, but on the ground, I just don't think he's going to have a whole lot of success.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think this is a bounce back game for him on the ground. I don't necessarily believe he's going to be, like an Alvin Kamara level efficiency player on the ground, but I could see this guy getting into that 4.5, 5 yards per carry type of range in this game. It was always going to be an absolute brutal matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers front 7. Obviously, again, the Los Angeles Chargers front 7 is a much more, I don't want to say depleted unit, but not even remotely holding a candle to what your Tampa Bay Buccaneers represent. And in this type of game, again, I expect this to be back and forth action, nonstop action. You mentioned the scoring opportunities. They're going to come in abundance. I think this is a team that is probably going to be in the red zone a good 4 or 5 times in this game, which if that's the case, we've seen Ezekiel Elliott be one of the better used running backs in the red zone really throughout his career. Not to mention, too, I do think that target workload does see a good bump up this week, especially with Michael Gallup missing time. You know, you got Dalton Schultz, Blake Jarwin, but realistically, what type of big step up they can take from last week? They already had a decent amount of targets last week. So if I think that, again, with Lyle Collins missing this game, they're going to need to supplement more short game passing to really make up for the fact that they're missing one of their top offensive linemen. If that's the case, I just don't necessarily see Ezekiel Elliott being thrust to the side like he did in week 1 in pretty much pure pass, bro. And if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that take. Elijah Mitchell, also a guy that we should probably address just because he was the big waiver wire ad this week. I have him 1 spot higher than consensus, currently my RB25. You have him 4 spots higher than consensus. I guess that would make him your RB21 on the week, or RB22 on the week. So the way I view Elijah Mitchell, again, I have Trey Sermon significantly higher than consensus as well. I'm not willing to fully buy into this Elijah Mitchell as this RB2 every single week until I see it for a couple games, because this is Kyle Shanahan, man. Like, with Trey Sermon's going to be active for this game with Raheem Mostert now on IR. I want to see how the 3-way timeshare between Mitchell, between Sermon, and between Hasty kind of works out. I have Mitchell the highest. He was the one I would play if I had to choose one, but I'm not 100% convinced that the 18 carries or whatever he saw last week is sustainable week over week.
Yeah, for sure. Again, I have him as my RB21, but that is on the back of pure efficiency. I don't necessarily see this being a 18 plus opportunity game for an Elijah Mitchell. Again, if you were able to get 18 plus opportunities, I'd have him much higher than 21. But even on 12 to 14 opportunities, which I think is a fair assumption for a lead back in a run heavy system, I think he can return value. Again, we're talking about one of the more efficient running backs in this backfield, fitting that mold of Raheem Mostert, Jerick McKinnon type that Shanahan has really gravitated towards down in the past. And although I do think Sermon's going to get a good chunk of maybe the goal line usage, I do think Elijah Mitchell getting him in space is going to be the main priority in this game as that main back. So it's close here. I mean, when you're talking about past the RB20 range, you're taking dart throws regardless on upside. And Elijah Mitchell in this matchup against Philly presents some of the most upside of these RB3 contingents.
For sure. And some of the guys that we have lower, one of the guys I have lower is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I have him 4 spots lower than consensus. I'll let you kind of pull up where you have him. But my thing with Clyde Edwards-Helaire is, I know he got the opportunity, right? Like, I think he had like a 92% opportunity share of the Chiefs backfield, but that resulted in like 14 carries and 3 targets. Like, that's what the Chiefs backfield is. It's not a big pie that we're very concerned with, because the Chiefs run their offense through the passing game, through Patrick Mahomes, through Tyreek Hill, and through Travis Kelce. And I talked about it on the running back starts and sits video, but what happened with Clyde Edwards-Helaire in week 1 is exactly what I expected to happen all week. He gets some touches, the bulk of the touches in the backfield, but he's not very efficient with them because he's not a super talented player, and he doesn't get a lot of scoring opportunity because the Chiefs don't simply use him in the red zone because they have Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, for sure. And mention the guy that I'm quote unquote lower on, the main one would be a Myles Gaskin, simply because, again, we're talking about the RB3 contingent range. I would personally rather have an Elijah Mitchell dart throw. Like who else do I have in that range? Elijah Mitchell's a guy like Chase Edmonds, Kareem Hunt, Tyson Williams are all guys I think present more upside on this given week. Myles Gaskin's a fine player. The problem is we saw the way Miami was cycling their running backs in week 1. While he does kind of have that stranglehold on that receiving role, I just don't necessarily see a ton of upside for Gaskin. Again, if you're in a PPR, you want a stable RB2, I'm fine with throwing him in your lineup. But if I'm punting my RB2 slot and I'm dealing with the Gaskins, the Gordons of the range, I would just rather shoot for an Elijah Mitchell upside.
Yeah, I don't hate that as well. Melvin Gordon is another guy I have lower than consensus. I have 7 spots lower, and I have his teammate Javonte Williams 2 spots higher than consensus. I think if you're going to start a Denver Broncos running back, it should be Javonte Williams, because these guys in week 1, and I'll remind you that one of these players is a rookie running back, not a veteran running back like Melvin Gordon. In week 1, Melvin Gordon was already outsnapped by Javonte Williams and had more carries than Javonte Williams. Javonte Williams had more carries than Melvin Gordon as well. So the fact that he is already the guy who is leading the backfield in touches makes me think week over week, as the season goes along, Javonte Williams is going to continue to get a stranglehold of that backfield. And yes, it's probably going to be 50-50 for a couple weeks, but I'm just going to continue to roll Javonte out there over Melvin Gordon and for the time being. And in this matchup against the Jags, they should both be pretty efficient. If they both get 14 carries or whatever they got last week, I expect Javonte to do more with them. Of course, Melvin Gordon had a 70-yard touchdown, which definitely aided his stat line, but I'm not expecting Melvin Gordon to be the most productive week over week. I think Javonte's the better running back. He's the better player, and I think he has more upside in the receiving game, although we did see Melvin Gordon get used in that way. Javonte is the better player pretty much all around. Receiving game, red zone, bulk of the carries, everything that you want out of Javonte Williams, you should get. And as the season goes along, I think that's going to kind of play itself out.
Yep, no, I fully agree with you on that kind of split. We saw Javonte Williams lead the backfield in week one. I don't necessarily believe that 170-yard rushing touchdowns to skew our thoughts on how this backfield is going to operate. So agree with you there. Let's go on to the wide receiver position, and let's start off with your Tampa Bay Buck, the guy that you have hanging in your background. Take it away with Mike Evans going up against that Atlanta Falcons secondary.
I'm actually going to pair him with Chase Claypool, who's also a guy that we have higher than consensus. So I have him 7 spots, Mike Evans higher than consensus, and Chase Claypool I have 5 spots higher. And the reason is these guys are both big play receivers. They're both big downfield threats. Both of them have great matchups. Mike Evans versus Fabian Moreau. AJ Terrell is the primary, the best corner on the Falcons. He's set to be slated against Antonio Brown. So I have a feeling this is a big Mike Evans game in this one. And that's kind of what we're going to need to do each week with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers receivers. I think 2 of them are going to produce every week. We just got to look at the matchups to see which 2 it's going to be. This week, I think it's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Of course, they had like 100% route participation last week. Antonio Brown down in the 70% range. So they still are the number 1 and 2 receiver of this team. And then on Chase Claypool's side of things, he's playing up against Casey Hayward, who's a bit of an older corner, has kind of lost a step. Chase Claypool is a 4.42 receiver who has a big size advantage on Casey Hayward as well. So if he was able to moss Tre'Davious White like he was last week, I think he could have a big play. A couple, big catches in this game against Casey Hayward in the Raiders secondary, which doesn't really scare me one bit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And are you sure Antonio Brown's not the wide receiver 1 for Tampa Bay?
No, he's not. Based on of course, he's going to be targeted when he's on the field. He's a great flex play. I think he's inside my top 30 receivers on the week, but he's not a guy that I'm starting over either of the other 2.
I'm messing with you because Twitter would tell you otherwise.
Of
but
course.
Yeah, and I agree with both. I have Evans 3 spots higher and Claypool 4 spots higher, basically saying, Evans and Baby Evans are both higher in my rankings, if that makes sense. So I'm excited to start both those guys. You mentioned the matchup discrepancies for both of those particular players. Yeah, give me all that. Another guy that we both have higher, and kind of a guy that if you threw into your lineup, a guy that we had in our top 20s last week would have disappointed tremendously. We're not talking about a disappointment. We're talking about a complete and utter donut. Take it away with Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, I have him at 35 on the week, so it's 12 spots higher than consensus, where he's currently rated right now by the experts. I'm willing to take the plunge on Brandon Ayuk. Kyle Shanahan does weird shit all the time. Maybe this was disciplinary. Maybe he missed curfew or didn't show up to practice, whatever some of the rumors are out there on. Again, I'm going to keep monitoring this closer to game time. If we keep hearing things like Brandon Ayuk's going to be limited or anything like that, then I'll move him down. But he's still a guy I'm willing to put in my flex spot this week because one bad game and one, bad couple reports that we've heard. We didn't hear anything like this all offseason. This just came up after the game. I think it's going to be a blip on the radar. I think this is a great buy low candidate if you're looking for a buy low wide receiver. I think this is a guy this was a guy I legitimately had of my top 45 overall players coming into the year. I'm not going to pivot off of him after one bad game where he didn't really get a whole lot of usage coming off of a hamstring injury.
Yeah, no, I fully agree here. Brandon Ayuk's got the talent, the separation, the status as that main outside wide receiver. The only problem here, again, we've mentioned Shanahan just throwing loops. Maybe that's going to be an issue. Maybe he doesn't get a full workload, but I am betting on the talent here. And if you can get him at a flex type of quote unquote price tag here in your lineup, I'm willing to take that plunge as well. So
now, if he's not used again this week, I will be worried. But yeah. I think this is going to be a blip on the radar this first week.
For sure. A guy that we're also higher on, and kind of the opposite of what Brandon Ayuk represents. You got that young ascending talent on the outside with a little bit of risk with Brandon Ayuk. But now we got the old steady veteran in the slot. Take it away with Cole Beasley.
Yeah, Cole Beasley, just plain and simple, has the best matchup on the field. Nick Needham is clearly the worst of the Dolphins' 3 corners between Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, and him. So give me Cole Beasley in the slot. He had a lot of targets last week, same amount of targets.
Right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, he had like 11 or 12, 13. I can't even remember exactly what the number was, but a lot of targets last week. He looked a little rusty coming off of, what was like kind of like a limited offseason for him. So
he didn't get his shot.
Yeah, exactly. So Cole Beasley, though, in this game, they're going to have to be able to move the ball against the Dolphins because I think the Dolphins are good enough offense to put up points on the other side of things. So give me Cole Beasley. If Diggs struggles at all, I think Cole Beasley should have a big game.
Yep, fully agree. I have Cole Beasley 7 spots higher. Again, he got absolutely fed in week 1. Obviously, as a whole, that the Bills' passing offense, quote unquote, struggled. However, that was from an efficiency standpoint. The volume was still in abundance there. We already know about Diggs. That guy's going to get 15 targets this week, but I do believe that Cole Beasley's in store for another double-digit target game. And what I believe to be a get-right game for the Bills offense, I am comfortable with starting him as a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 / flex type in my lineup. So like Cole Beasley, another guy I really like and a guy that I was extremely high on this offseason. Man, Corey Davis was an absolute alpha in week one. We're talking about a guy that neared 100 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. I get it. The matchup against the New England Patriots is not ideal, to say the least, going up against JC Jackson. But this is more a testament to what I believe with Corey Davis. I think he's truly ascending into that must-start alpha wide receiver build. And the reason I only even have him at wide receiver 25 as opposed to maybe even higher is because of uncertainty of how this Jets offense is going to perform against the New England Patriots. But if he has a game similar to what he did in week one, we could be talking about a locked and loaded top 15 wide receiver the rest of the year. I really do believe he has the talent and the target share to be able to meet those expectations.
Yeah, my only concern is Zach Wilson going up against Bill Belichick.
100%.
Bill Belichick against rookie quarterbacks, that makes me really, really nervous, obviously. No Stephon Gilmore, which definitely helps Corey Davis a little bit, but yeah, it's a little bit of a sketchy situation for me. So I have him 4 spots higher than consensus. I believe, exactly what you believe. I think this is a guy that's ascending into what could be an alpha wide receiver 2 type all year for fantasy. But I think Zach Wilson's going to struggle a lot in this game, similar to what we saw in the first half against Carolina last week. So that's my only concern with Corey Davis, but I do, still want to start him as like a top 30 wide receiver this week. And 2 guys that we can quickly mention because we kind of are differentiated on these 2 guys, but we could place a bet right now. I have Courtland Sutton 7 spots higher than consensus. You have Jamar Chase 7 spots higher than consensus. And then the other one of us has him 1 spot higher. So I really like Courtland Sutton this week. He's not playing James Bradbury in shadow coverage like he was last week. He's going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars secondary, which, while improved from last year with Shaquille Griffin and CJ Henderson's, I think Courtland Sutton's going to win that matchup pretty easily. So I really like Courtland Sutton this week. Now Jerry Jeudy out for a couple weeks, should be a guy that produces at a pretty high clip over the next few games. So I really like Courtland Sutton as like a top 24 wide receiver this week. I think he's a guy that has to be in your lineup. And Jamar Chase, I still really like Jamar Chase this week, but I'll let you kind of make the case for him.
Yeah, for sure. I'll quickly say on Sutton, again, this is nothing to do against him. I think he's a good alpha boundary style wide receiver. I just genuinely believe that we saw what Jamar Chase is capable of. We're talking about a guy who had a 27% target share in week one as a rookie. He produced 5 for 101 in a game where Joe Burrow only threw the ball 28 times. Now, do I think that volume is going to be particularly low for the rest of the season? No, I think this Bengals offense is going to adjust itself. You got week 1 of Joe Burrow on a tight knee scheduling timeline after that ACL injury. I genuinely think once he feels more comfortable in that pocket, they're going to be willing to throw the ball more. And as much as I want to talk about T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd throughout this offseason, look, Jamar Chase looked like a complete alpha wide receiver. I expect this guy at his ceiling to be maybe not Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb this year, but probably a fringe top 12 wide receiver at his ceiling. And if that's the case, ranking him at 19, I don't think it's too crazy. Man, this is just the belief of the player, belief of the talent, belief of the opportunity that he had at his disposal, going up against an overmatched Bears secondary that truly struggled against that Rams passing attack last week. I just think we're ready for the Jamar Chase ascension.
For sure. Yeah, I don't disagree with the Jamar Chase take at all. So a few guys that were lower on, I'll just speed through Antonio Brown because we already kind of talked about him. He has the hardest matchup on the field of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers. That is why I have him a little bit lower, 4 spots lower than consensus for me. I believe I have him around the wide receiver 30-ish range. I don't exactly know. Where do you have him exactly?
I have him at 33, I believe. He's currently at wide receiver 27 the last time I checked.
He's at 23 actually in consensus.
I have him at 29.
Yeah, so I'm at 27 overall. So he's still a guy that you're starting, obviously, in your like flex spot or something like that. But overall, having him inside the top 24 wide receivers when he has the worst matchup on the field, I don't think that's necessarily the smartest thing in the world. Mike Williams, I don't think we've really touched on this yet, but in that Cowboys-Chargers game that we expect to be so high scoring, we can pretty much predict that Mike Williams is going to have the hardest matchup on the field of the Chargers wide receivers because they deployed Trayvon Diggs mostly in shadow coverage versus Mike Evans last week. And Mike Williams and Mike Evans are both that big physical downfield type of wide receiver. Now, Mike Williams is being used a little bit differently than he was in years past, but I still think the point holds true that Trayvon Diggs is probably going to be on Mike Williams. Therefore, I expect Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler to carry the load in the receiving game.
For sure. I'm just thinking about it from a Cowboy schematic standpoint. You have Trayvon Diggs, who's a more big physical type of corner. Are you really going to put him on a savvy route runner like Keenan Allen? I just think that's a mismatch in itself. If you want to get the most out of a Trayvon Diggs, you let him shadow against Mike Williams. You put Lewis on Keenan Allen with a little bit of help over the top. I think that's the best case scenario for how the Cowboys can attack that Chargers offense. And if I'm thinking that, I'm sure Dan Quinn is thinking that because I'm sure Dan Quinn's not saying, oh, yeah, let me just match up shadow coverage Trayvon Diggs on Keenan Allen all game because that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, for sure. And the last guy that we're a bit lower on, we kind of already touched on as well, but Deebo Samuel, we're just not believers yet, right? Like we have
Yeah.
him, I have him 13 spots lower than consensus. He's still inside my top 36 wide receivers.
Yeah.
Consensus just has him way too high. They have him at
Yeah, but
21. Like
20, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's way too high for a guy in Deebo Samuel who was quite literally playing against the worst secondary in the league this year, in my opinion, with the Detroit Lions. And he also had Brandon Ayuk running a limited route tree, running limited snaps. I think he's going to be back, as I mentioned kind of before, to his full workload this week. And even if he's not, this Eagles secondary is not nearly as bad as the Detroit Lions.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree. So I also have him 11 spots lower. Again, if he proves me wrong, he proves me wrong. I just think that there's much more, there's much better options available for you this week. And those people that have him with top 20 expectations are just completely piggybacking off of that week one where he had a 79-yard touchdown when he basically just made Jeff Okudah look like a fucking silly band, on all honesty.
Yeah, for sure. So moving from the wide receiver position to the tight end position, obviously the tight end position not as glamorous as the other one. So
Yeah.
we'll speed through these real quick. But Robert Tonyan, I think he's in for a bounce back game,
Yep.
as is the entire Green Bay Packers offense. So I have him 2 spots higher. You have him 1 spot higher. Another guy that, is a great guy to go out and buy. Maybe he's even on your waiver wire to pick up if you need a tight end, is Cole Kmet. This was a dude that was running over 70% of the routes for the
8
Chicago Bears.
targets.
8 targets, 16% target share, I believe, in this game. Jimmy Graham was a non-factor in terms of running routes and stuff like that. So this is the clear number 1 tight end on this team. He's going to be involved as long as, Andy Dalton's a starter. And I think once Justin Fields becomes the starter, then Cole Kmet is really going to get more upside on a week over week basis from a scoring perspective. So I think Kmet's a guy that you can start pretty much week in and week out, and a guy that I'm definitely stashing as well.
I was about to say, like, Cole Kmet to me is one of the easiest buys at the tight end position right now. Because I'm telling you right now, even if you don't want to hold him throughout the year, as soon as Justin Fields is named the starter, his value is going to skyrocket. So I absolutely love Cole Kmet. I think he is supplanted easily as a top 15 tight end on a week-to-week basis. Absolutely love him. I'll quickly mention Jared Cook. I know we don't have him written down here, but I mentioned that Chargers matchup versus the Cowboys. The Cowboys just came off a game where Rob Gronkowski went ballistic, and in a matchup that I think is going to put up a lot of points. We mentioned we think Mike Williams is going to struggle. If that's the case, I do think that Jared Cook is going to have that down the field, down seam type of threat to this Cowboys secondary. And we saw him get involved in abundance in week 1. 8 targets for the new acquisition this offseason. I really just think that we see Herbert and his rapport keep developing on a week-to-week basis. So I love Jared Cook.
Yeah, no disagreements on the Jared Cook take. I have him actually higher than the guy I'm about to talk about in Jonnu Smith, who we both have 2 spots lower than consensus. And I mean, I love Jonnu Smith. You guys know this. If you've been listening to the channel for a number of years, obviously, I love Jonnu Smith. But what I saw in week 1 is concerning because him and Hunter Henry quite literally split routes down the middle. Like they were running the same amount of routes. Target share obviously was in favor of Jonnu Smith, but the target share could be in favor of Hunter Henry this week. Like they're running the same type of usage, which means it's going to be hard to predict week over week which guy gets the targets, maybe which guy gets the touchdown that week. So I think Jonnu Smith needs to be a boomer bust type of tight end option, a tight end 15-ish range in the rankings, where he's currently inside the top 12, I believe, in ECR. I just think I would rather have Cole Kmet this week. I would rather have Jared Cook this week. I'd rather have Robert Tonyan this week. And all those guys are kind of in the same range of ECR
Dallas
right now.
Goedert. Yeah.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert as well.
Yep, I agree with that. And talking about another guy that we're lower on, and a guy that I'm significantly lower on, and that's going to be Mike Gesicki. And I just think he's obsolete in this offense. I mean, we saw as soon as Jalen Waddle was introduced to this team, Mike Gesicki was basically thrown to the side. I believe he had less than a 40% snap share in this game. And if
he ran the most snaps of the Dolphins tight ends, but Durham Smythe was actually quite as involved as Mike Gesicki. It was like almost a 50-50 share. They also used Hunter Long to like a 20% snap share as well. So I think this is kind of like a 3-way tight end committee that we're dealing with. And Mike Gesicki isn't a talented or efficient enough player to produce without the full-fledged tight end 1 role on this team. And last year, he was the full-fledged tight end 1 on this team. He had 2 blow-up games all year and did nothing the rest of the season, basically. And Will Fuller isn't back for this game. We heard today that he's dealing with like a personal issue, but especially once Will Fuller gets back on this team, I think Gesicki's going to get even pushed more to the side and more out of favor in this offense. So in my opinion, if you have Cole Kmet, Jared Cook on your waiver wire right now, drop Mike Gesicki for those guys because I'd much rather have them long-term.
Not even a debate, in my opinion. Mike Gesicki is worth nothing, and I do believe that both Cole Kmet and Jared Cook are going to be significant pieces in their offense. So off of the overall tight ends, I kind of wanted to add this little transition because we always talk about like the top 15 tight ends, kind of the expected guys on a week-to-week basis. But we wanted to add a couple dart throws this week. And a guy that I actually have ranked in my top 20 at 19th overall is going to be Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, we saw him actually used as the tight end one for the Steelers in week 1, completely out-snapping Eric Ebron. They used a second-round pick for him. I mentioned that I do think that this downfield passing attack may not have enough time to truly encapsulate what the Steelers usually want to do. And if that's the case, I do think Pat Freiermuth underneath is going to be able to get involved. And as we know, Pat Freiermuth, if they're in the red zone area, we have seen throughout college that he's able to get it done in that regard. So I think Pat Freiermuth is a sneaky, basically what I thought of Cole Kmet last year, where every now and then, he'll contribute in terms of his usage. But I do think that Pat Freiermuth has a chance to have a 6-7 target game, and he's currently being ranked outside the top 40 tight ends.
Yeah, no, don't disagree there. If you guys are in a DFS lineup and you need, a DraftKings minimum tight end for your lineup to make it work, then Pat Freiermuth, throw him in there. Another guy, probably DraftKings minimum price tight end, is CJ Uzomah. I just think this game's going to be high scoring. I think Joe Burrow and the Bengals are going to be able to put up points on the Chicago Bears, and CJ Uzomah, much like Pat Freiermuth, is the clear-cut tight end one on his team.
Yep. No, I absolutely love CJ Uzomah too. A guy that, I know it's just random, but round 18 in underdog drafts, if you're making a Bengals stack, I got him a few times. So anyways, if you made it this far in video, you enjoyed the video thus far, you enjoy us rambling about our rankings, rambling about our discrepancies from ECR, make sure you drop a like down below. And as always, if you're new to the channel, if you've never seen us before this video, hit that subscribe button. We are currently on the road to 10,000 subscribers. We're just about at 6,400. So if you're watching this and you see we're under that, make sure we get over that. Anyways, appreciate that. Love y'all. See you tomorrow.
Peace out.